This is the post-week 6 episode of the LPL Immersion. I've renamed it from the LPL ranking because I think that my process is very different from the LL Esports power ranking, and I don't really want to be associated very closely with that. Not that their approach is bad, but one thing that they, as a philosophy definitely of the power ranking, is we can only rate off what we see. And I kind of think that we see a lot more than just results. And I tend to weight a lot more on how teams lose or why I think teams are losing. Yes, I say LPL immersion because I'm really thinking about the strategy of playoff bracket placements and where teams might be willing to drop games to get better seeding, or where teams might be trying to pick up some extra points. When you 2-0, you get 3 extra points, and right now the top 7 teams are only 5 points apart. 5 points. You could literally go a weekend, because most teams on average have 2 best of 2s in a weekend, go undefeated, so win all 4 of your games, and suddenly end up in first place when depending on how the other teams do. That's pretty significant. And on top of that, pretty much everyone is splitting with everyone. It's not an exaggeration. Edward Gaming has lost to the bottom 3 teams in the standings. Just how it is right now. It's really hard to just say absolutely, okay, based on ranking, and this team lost to this team, which team is stronger. That's why when I call it immersion, it's just I'm really thinking like how I think they perform, and I'm basing it off of what I see in game. Right now it's just a dumpster fire. I moved them back down to 12th after them being in 11th. They're showing promise 2 weeks ago, yeah, that's for sure, and then they even, as much as a week ago, showed promise. The problem is that now it's just very clear that certain members of the team don't give a shit. Zero, both his Korean and Chinese solo queue account are currently rank 1, and he's mostly playing AD carry champions. He's also spending a lot of his time playing ARAMs with Invictus Gaming's coach Mafa. And if you're a pro player, there's really not an excuse to be Diamond 1 unless you're just not playing. Now, the shining light of those teams are actually, aside from Name, who I've probably expressed I think is actually coming back, he's doing well. He's actually said he thinks Deft is underperforming, and he outperformed Deft in the Edward Gaming set, which, I mean, Name, of course, knows a little bit about underperforming. So he's the best in the league, but he's doing a lot better than I think people even remember him doing last split, and it's the one, impressive thing to see for sure almost every game. The other shining lights are sadly Insect Top and Hue. So you've got this guy who's just doesn't really understand, overcommits to almost every engage, has weirdly only had luck on, Yasuo and Vladimir, and then you have the jungler who literally only plays Rek'Sai. So much so that if they don't get Rek'Sai, it's almost guaranteed that they'll lose that game. Zero builds Quicksilver Sash and Guardian Angel before he builds Mikhail's, even if it's very clear that they're just targeting Name, namely like they do every game. Corrin, I have no idea. Can his team just ban Azir so that he doesn't get to play it? Because it's pretty bad. The Echo decision making from the Demacia Cup games last night, Zero actually apparently probably threw some sort of hissy fit and got benched for Sync Dream. This team is just falling apart. Slowly before your eyes, which is really sad to see because, again, all the promising players and theoretically on this team, that bottom lane was looking really strong, and now there's just nothing to salvage from it. Okay, WE has soared up a lot, and yeah, this is because they're winning games, but it's mostly still the same reason they're winning games as they've always won games. For whatever reason, people stopped banning Spirits champions. Just say that WE has always been that way. They've always been able to rise to the top based off of Spirit's champion pick, and if he can really get a champion he can 1v3 on, if he can get those explosive casks, if he can get the proper Nidalee assassinations, and even Rek'Sai, if he can dominate the map really hard using her high mobility, is pretty much the same as they were a couple weeks ago. I literally nothing. Nope. They have highs from being able to identify weaknesses in other teams and craft compositions around them, but their execution is just so inconsistent. The players themselves are just so inconsistent, and Hart is probably pulling some full-on Reaper shit. These players literally die for no reason when he's not around, so actually fallen quite a bit. It used to be in 6th place. I have it in number 9. It's actually 9th place in the standings. I think it's just becoming very apparent that all this team really does is pick weird bottom lane champions, specifically AD carries, and team fight. They're Dragon control is really inconsistent. Some games they'll have really excellent dragon control, and other games they just won't get a single dragon the entire time. They don't really rotate very smart. They're just good at brawls. They're good at bringing you down to their level, and they do a fair amount of work with that. I have no idea why I like Whoosh at this point, actually. I think I only like Whoosh because he doesn't have a lot of hype around him, and at this point I can just kind of predict, oh, he's going to pick, like, Vayne, or he's going to pick 80 carry Varus, and it's going to be awful. It's shocking because they are tied for third, but it is a three-way tied for third, so they could be fifth or they could be third. More likely to be fifth because they've played one more match than the other two teams, and it's probably likely that the other two teams, since everyone is splitting, can't get a 1-1 in their next sets, is where it is, because we are seeing Dade, instead of every other week he'll play a game that's good, he'll play a game every other game that's good. That's the biggest difference. Looper has also found a lot more champions that he can be solid on beyond just Gnar and Hecarim this time around. His teleports still leave a lot to be desired, but you have this really strong core of Condi when he gets an aggressive champion, and then he can either cancel Looper or Dade's side, and chances are one of them will have a good game. That's how they got a lot of points that frankly were surprising to some people. They still have trouble closing, and they still have SMLZ in the bottom lane, which frankly doesn't inspire any confidence in me at all. He just farms, and sometimes he gets kills if people fall on his auto attack. Like, literally you have to fall on his auto attack for him to get a kill. Number 7. I've actually dropped them quite a bit for games. I think I said last time that I'd need to see them play Maokai and something besides Maokai and Sivir to get a good idea. Well, I've seen them play it, and it has been really uninspiring. It's fun to see Loveling back playing in Demacia Cup, even again, though they were against a really bad team, without UZI on the roster, because he kind of got to play Rengar and do whatever he wanted. Obviously, I don't think that's going to be a huge strategy in the current meta, but it was nice to see them blow off some steam as a team, instead of just the pressure of trying to figure out what to do if they can't get UCI ahead. Moved up 2 spots this time around. They moved up because I do think that there are aspects of this team that actually look about the same, on par with when Vici Gaming was doing well last split. I think Mata is putting up a lot more solid performances. He's had some games where he just kind of goes off, and he's everywhere across the map. Dandy is actually adjusting to top lane pretty well. I don't like it, but hey, it's what it is. World 6 is the big troubling thing because he gets Gragas most of the time, and Gragas is by far and away his best jungler. When you talk about there are a lot of Rek'Sai dependent players in LPL, he's a weird, rare Gragas dependent player. They'd end up moving down total of 3, so we have a lot of movement in this area just because the point system is so close, and I'm trying to get a good gauge of where these teams stand. Nijas Gaming has had a lot of drama, a lot of inconsistency in their draft phase, and it's just come down to Cacao and Rookie, and a lot of times they're dependent on a long game stalling out and other teams not making decisive calls. They've run things like double tier. Kids had a traditionally passive laning phase, and Master 3 just got the better of them. They did manage to 2-0 King. They had the only perfect game of the year, I think, so far in LPL, where King didn't get a single tower, dragon, or kill. But let's be honest, it's King. This I need to talk about at a little bit more length, because they moved up from their 8th place right now, so they're not in the 5-point zone, okay? They're a little bit further down. I think they're 7 points away from first. But there's a criminal underrating of LGD that permeates, like, I think, perceptions and power rankings and everywhere else, because they're rated below CLG in the LLE Sports Tower rankings, and I don't like to be disparaging because I think that they have their own criteria and they have their reasons for doing certain things, but LGD is always rated way too low, and I don't understand why. I think it's because they're the one team in China that really consistently does the thing that Chinese teams aren't supposed to do, which is rotate, which is pick the correct tower or objective to go to and just leave the other team stranded. I do factor in Demacia Cup results. I know LLE Esports doesn't really value those, and I don't value them as highly as LPL results, but when you're playing the same rotation-based strategy, even with Godby playing ADC because Imp is at the visa office, and you're still able to get a game, that's really impressive against a team like Qiao Gu. I think Qiao Gu is still going to keep dropping because they're so dependent on their jungle pick, and I'm going to get to that. At the same time, though, just smart. They can team fight really well. Like, all the players are talented. The thing about Godvi's wrist, yeah, Godvi is having wrist problems, but you wouldn't really know it. And I'm worried about this team because of that, because maybe it will fall apart because Godvi just can't ignore his recommendations anymore, because his doctor did recommend that he rest more. His doctor did recommend that he play fewer competitive games. And I think he was playing less solo queue, but if it gets really bad, that's going to be an issue. Flame is solid, Acorn is solid. Both of them are putting up really strong games, and Imp, just people don't talk enough about Imp and how he's able to self-sufficiently position now when he really wasn't his bag before. In Demacia Cup, Qiao Gu played their famous Nocturne Cassidon composition, and they just went for Imp's Bane all the time, but he was able to kite them by himself pretty much consistently. Like, people talked about how Flame should have gotten the MVP for that as Hecarim. Flame is a great player. I just think that he tends to be, when he has something that looks good, people tend to ignore the rest of the players on his team for the sake of Flame. Which, there's something definitely great to be said about that. He's definitely a player that draws a lot of attention to himself. He's really strong. But that was not a good game, and we need to admit that that was not a good game from Flame. The point is that LGD is underrated because the way they play makes them look more inconsistent, because the way they have to carefully guard around their jungler, and I thought about this, because I give TBQ a lot of shit, right, for being dependent on Lee Sin, for making a lot of mechanical and decision-making based misplays, but if TBQ weren't TBQ, LGD wouldn't be able to develop the playstyle they developed, which is centered around hiding him. They wouldn't be the smartest team in LPL. They wouldn't be the team that, if anyone can become better than Edward Gaming, it's them, because they are so unique and because they have this edge. I actually think if LGD went to an international event, they would do better than Edward Gaming because they have a really strong concept of map movement and minion control. They're going to split 1-1 with a bunch of people, but where they are right now, 8th place is a pretty good place to be, because you can still move up a couple slots to decide where you want to be in the standings in the last couple of weeks of LPL, without having to make a lot of wiggle room. Like, they're going to be fine. They're going to make playoffs. They're going to be a playoff contending team. They're probably going to be at least a top 4 team by the end, which is why I had them top 4 here, because I already think they're a top 4 team. When they had their full roster and Imp was done with visa issues and their synergy is slowly ramping up, they completely demolished us. Games of the split have been out featuring LGD's thought process and the way they move around the map. Don't you think that a team that finished second in playoffs and had such a strong start last split that they could effectively dick around for the second half of the regular season and did completely ridiculous picks like the Ashe comp with the Galio is just messing around, that team has some control over where they want to be in the standings and some concept of the regular season strategy? Do you think that honestly LGD would lose to Counter Logic Gaming in a best of 5? Is this an actual thought process that people have? Because I'm honestly baffled. I understand why LGD is underrated this split and last split, especially when they were very obviously trolling last split, and this split they had some issues with cohesion that they're immediately starting to ramp up. That they've been showing signs of progression over time, and now we rate them below Counter Logic Gaming. Okay. Despite the fact that they are rated second in the standings and they're very close to actually overtaking Edward Gaming for first, they've had a lot of their weaknesses exposed, and by that I mean their jungler is dependent on certain picks. Not to say that Swift is a bad jungler, but I think the more he plays like these aggressive style picks, the more he looks comfortable, but the more he plays something squishier like Nidalee or tries to play something from behind, he just goes all in and keeps committing to these dives. So if Qiao Gu ever gets behind, they're going to have serious problems. But right now, because it's almost like it is a strength. Like, if Qiao Gu has a good engagement opportunity and Swift goes in and doesn't hesitate to pull the trigger and everyone on Qiao Gu backs them up, there's no stopping that team. That's really, really strong for them. However, someone is going to get them behind. Teams do get them behind, and they're finding ways to outmatch them in the early game more and more often. And Qiao Gu is having trouble with comebacks. So that's why I'm actually rating them lower than they should be according to the standings. This is really weird, but I think that Snake, for me, the advantage that they have is as these games keep getting longer and longer, they have a mid laner called Yu, and Yu isn't the flashiest player, and Yu isn't the best mid laner in LPL, but he has this weird advantage. When I talk about ranking mid laners and what makes mid laners unique and what makes mid laners stand out within a region, and when you think of an elite mid laner, there's usually something they're really, really good at relative to other mid laners in history, right? That's unique to them. For me, Yu's ability to teamfight from behind is really, really special. It's something that Dade probably obviously had on Samsung Blue, but right now, I think in terms of team fighting from behind, Yu is probably the best in the region given Dade's inconsistencies. Something that will let them always split even, that's something that will let them find these 3-0s if they want to. If they pick Yu, like a strong team fighting mid that he has a lot of practice on and a lot of experience with, especially Azir, as we've seen recently, they can make comebacks in these long games that are being played. So right now, that favors them a lot. I'm not going to get into Edward Gaming a lot. If you want to hear my thoughts on Edward Gaming, I recently published an article for the Score Esports, the mid-season review, in which I go into great detail where I think Edward Gaming's problems lie. I think they have issues with the fact that Def's effective champion pool right now is pretty much Corki and Sivir, and if Corki is picked on the enemy team, he can play Ezreal into it. Def has also had a champion pool issue. I don't think he really understands disengage very well, which is why he sort of fumbles a lot of these Gragas ultimates. And he never really had to deal with a lot of the zoning. Like, he used Nuno as more of an engage tool or something to make teams like walk around him, whereas Korra was really good at the zoning out threats, and Clearlove was very good at locking them down. And that's what made their synergy so strong in teamfights. So when we see some of that synergy picked apart, we start to see more and more flaws in Edward Gaming's teamfighting, the small, tiny mistakes as they rotate these solo laners, because the strengths of Edward Gaming have always been in terms of how the pieces on their team fit together. If you start shaking up those pieces, especially with a language barrier, you're not going to get the best results ever. But for now, they're just in first place because I think they'll get stuff back together. Supposedly, they're going to start playing more with their MSI roster, probably because they're threatened in the standings. And maybe we'll see them start to get that synergy back. Anyway, that's about it for this week. If you have any questions, let me know. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter at KARONMOSER or at Chinese LOL Broadcasting Channel on Twitter. Please also subscribe to the channel if you can. I'll come out with another one of these videos in a couple weeks, and there's always trying to talk, maybe some more VOD reviews. Extra points. And right now, the top 7 teams are only 5 points apart. 5 points. You could literally go a weekend, because most teams on average have 2 best of 2s in a weekend, go undefeated, so win all 4 of your games, and suddenly end up in first place when depending on how the other teams do. That's pretty significant. And on top of that, pretty much we see a lot more than just results. I tend to wait a lot more on how teams lose or why I think teams are losing. Yes, I say LPL Immersion because I'm really thinking about the strategy of playoff bracket placements and where teams might be willing to drop games to get better seeding, or where teams might be trying to pick up some extra points. When you 2-0, you get 3 extra. Everyone is splitting with everyone. It's not an exaggeration. Edward Gaming has lost to the bottom 3 teams in the standings. Just how it is right now. It's really hard to just say absolutely, okay, based on ranking, and this team lost to this team, which team is stronger. That's why when I call it immersion, it's just I'm really thinking like how I think they perform, and I'm basing it off of what I see in game. Right now it's just a dumpster fire. I moved them back down to 12th after them being in 11th. They're showing promise 2 weeks ago, yeah, that's for sure. And then they even, as much as a week ago, showed promise. The problem is that now it's just very clear that certain members of the team don't give a shit. Hero, both his Korean and Chinese solo queue account are currently rank 1, and this is the post-week 6 episode of the LPL Immersion. I've renamed it from the LPL ranking because I think that my process is very different from the LL Esports power ranking, and I don't really want to be associated very closely with that. Not that their approach is bad, but one thing that they, the philosophy definitely of the power rankings, we can only rate off what we see. And I kind of think that